heavy breather on the line, or maybe a hang-up phone call. A cold letter mailed to taunt police or a victim's family. A mean-spirited email meant to inflict pain on its recipient. What do all of these things have in common? They're all various modes of communication connected to shocking crimes going back decades. I'm Mike Morford, host of the podcast Killer Communications, and in every episode, I tell the story of a case involving some form of sinister contact, whether it's to a victim, their family, police, or the press. For the senders of these communications, it's bold and brazen. For the recipients, it can be frightening or downright terrifying. And you won't believe just how often it happens. Check out Killer Communications right now everywhere you listen to podcasts, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
You're listening to DNA ID, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Citizen Detective, and Campus Killings. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
It was 1975. At about 2:30 p.m. on December 6th, Westminster, Colorado Police Dispatch took a phone call from a Glenn Roberts. Glenn reported that he and his wife were out tearing it up on their motorcycles on a dirt service road abutting a weedy field when his wife had tire trouble. He parked his bike on the dirt road and got on hers to test it out. He drove into the field, and as he circled back to the dirt road, he almost drove up on a dead body. He told his wife not to look and rode to the nearest phone. Westminster police officers Lee Burke and Jim Campbell responded to the field, located at West 100th Avenue and North Lowell Boulevard. They arrived at 2:47 p.m. and met Glenn, who led them to what he'd found. A woman lay on the ground in the unmaintained field, less than 10 feet from the dirt access road. Officer Burke's notes indicate that it was immediately apparent to him that the woman was dead, and that she was the victim of a presumed sex crime. The officers called in the homicide sergeant on duty, detectives, the coroner, and the DA. Then they roped off the field and waited for the cavalry. Arriving Detective Lieutenant Don Hauptmann and lead detective Frank Lewerk observed the victim and noted the following. The young white woman lay on her back. She was wearing nothing but a shirt that had been bunched up around her neck, leaving her nude from the throat down, save for her right arm, still encased in the sleeve of a jean jacket. The dead woman's arms and legs were spread-eagled, implying that she had been sexually assaulted. She also had marks on her body that made it apparent that she had been physically assaulted. She had scratches on both sides of her throat and an abrasion on her left breast. Items of clothing presumed to belong to her lay around her body. The woman's hands were sealed into brown paper bags. Then the body was wrapped in a sheet and removed by the Adams County Coroner's Office to the Rice Funeral Home in Brighton, Colorado. Short blurbs ran in the local papers, like the Rocky Mountain News, stating that police were trying to identify the body of a young, nude white woman found in a suburban Denver field. Dr. Donald Clark performed the autopsy on the unidentified woman, who was 5'5" and 120 pounds, with dark, wavy, shoulder-length hair. He noted multiple superficial abrasions and contusions on the victim's neck, and interiorly changes on the neck consistent with an applied force. The marks on her throat seemed to be either fingernail marks or marks made by a ring scraping her neck. A sticky mucus plug was removed from the victim's larynx and trachea, consistent with mucus from the lungs entering the trachea as the victim struggled for air. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxia. Dr. Clark posited that the victim could have been strangled by her own long-sleeved white shirt, or a hand and/or the shirt could have been placed over her mouth, cutting off her air supply. A large amount of dirt in the dead woman's mouth, but not her nose, told the pathologist that she had been face down in the dirt while she was not breathing. Dr. Clark concluded that the victim had been lying on her right side for some period of time because of blood pooled there. He concluded that she was possibly killed elsewhere and then placed in the field where she was found. The blood pooling was consistent with her lying in a car trunk or the bed of a pickup. Scrapes on her body could have happened as she was taken out of a vehicle or truck bed, or from the weeds scraping her back as she was placed in the field where she was found. These consisted of an area of broken skin near her right eye, abraded areas on her chin, 2 bruises on her inner right deltoid area and superficial linear abrasions on her mid-neck, a bruise over the sternum mastoid muscle on the left side of her neck, 5 linear superficial scrapes just below her left breast, vertical linear superficial abraded areas on her right thigh, linear vertical recent scrape abrasions on her back, transverse superficial recent scrapes on the posterior surface of both knees, and superficial abrasions consistent with scrapes on the mid-upper portion of both thighs. This next little bit contains some things that are pretty hard to hear, so you might want to skip ahead 45 seconds or so. A large deposit of a substance presumed to be seminal fluid was detected in the victim's vagina. There were no tears or evident trauma to the vaginal area, but the same could not be said for the anal region. Recent lacerations and contusions of the anus, including a 1/4-inch tear, were noted. Dried blood extending down the right buttock was suspected to have resulted from forcible penetration and injury to the anus, which was dilated. Fecal matter was evident and had been smeared about exteriorly. This woman had been brutally penetrated anally, but the lack of seminal fluid or sperm in that area led the pathologist to believe she had been victimized by an object, such as a Coke bottle. Straw and dirt from the field was found stuck to the victim's battered body. And as I mentioned, there was visible blood in her injured anal area, but blood found on her jeans and underwear was confusing to the investigators. They questioned whether she had gotten dressed after the assault. I think the answer to this was found in the pathologist's report, which mentioned that there was evidence of menses. The blood on her clothes was previously deposited menstrual fluid. The point is, this woman did not get redressed after the assault on her. She was killed, and the investigators were left trying to reconstruct what had happened. Fingerprints were obtained from the dead woman. She was identified by those prints, on record with the police, as Teree Becker. Her current address was 1042 Logan, apartment 120, Denver. Dr. Clark collected all the usual samples: pubic hair samples and combings, a head hair, fingernail scrapings, 2 hairs found in Terry's anal area, another hair found on her body, blood and urine samples, and vaginal, anal, and oral swabs. He also collected her shirt, possibly the murder weapon, and a ring from her left middle finger. As for an estimate of time of death, it was impossible to tell. The temperature had dropped to 34 degrees the night before Teree was found. Dr. Clark believed, based on the dried blood and lividity, that she had been dead for at least 6 hours, but he couldn't be more specific than that. After all the testing was completed at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation lab, Detective Lewerk spoke with CBI criminalist Ted DeVellis. He had conducted lab tests on Teree's clothes, which were blood-stained. Ted advised that Teree had a rare type of blood, AB negative. Only 2 to 3% of the population had this type of blood. There was a possibility that Teree's unusual blood type would potentially mask any other blood type that might be from the killer. Ted DeVellis also reported that intact sperm was found in Teree's vaginal swabs, but there was no sperm or semen on her underwear, jeans, or any other clothing, indicating that she had never redressed after the sexual encounter, or that she had changed her clothes. It was possible that she had been raped after she was killed, but it was also possible that the sperm was from a previous encounter, sometime within a couple of days preceding the murder. There was no sperm in the anal swabs, and Teree's throat culture was negative for sperm and semen. There was no tissue detected in Teree's fingernail scrapings, and detectives wondered why. Dr. Clark explained, based on a fresh bruise on the left side of Teree's chin, that she had very likely been knocked unconscious and was unable to fight back. As for the 2 hairs found in Terry's anal region, quote, a macroscopic and microscopic examination of the package containing the 2 hairs from the anal region of the victim disclosed the presence of a hair which indicated morphological characteristics of origin from a dog. The other hair disclosed morphological characteristics consistent with that of a caucasoid hair, end quote. Of course, since Teree was found outside in the elements, those hairs could have come from anywhere. Terry's toxicology report was negative for any narcotics, and her blood alcohol level was 0.049%. I'm happy to announce that DNA ID will be on Podcast Row at CrimeCon again this year. Last year, I met so many amazing listeners who stopped by my booth to say hello. And I met several incredible members of law enforcement, 2 of whom brought me cases that I ended up covering in Season 4. CrimeCon 2025 is taking place in Aurora, Colorado on September 5th, 6th, and 7th, and I really hope to see you there. Please make sure you use my voucher, DNA ID, all one word, at checkout when you purchase your badge to save 10%. That's real savings. Again, DNA ID, all one word, in the voucher box at checkout to save 10% on your badge. See you in the Rockies. So who was Teree Blair Becker? Teree was born to William and Phyllis Becker on May 9, 1955 in Denver, Colorado. She grew up on Hawthorne Avenue in Casper, Wyoming with brother David and sister Nina. Her father was an automobile dealer in Casper. Teree graduated from Kelly Walsh High School in 1972 and for a time worked for the Golden Bell Press, a local newspaper. But she soon left that job and moved down to the Denver metro area. This is from a mini bio of Teree released by the Westminster Police. Teree often stayed with friends and family and was described as a free spirit. Her family said that she often lived life on the edge. They said she never met a stranger and would hold a conversation with anyone. Teree enjoyed painting and listening to music. Her favorite bands were Three Dog Night and Steppenwolf. From what I saw in the police file, Teree was described by her family and friends as outgoing, vivacious, and friendly, someone who got along with everyone and had no prejudices. She didn't stay in one place for long and was labeled a hippie type by some people interviewed by police. She was a tough girl. Some people said she was moody and volatile. She and her current boyfriend had a relationship that had gotten physically confrontational, with Teree holding her own in fisticuff situations. Teree was very young and a bit flighty, and while she was trying to figure herself out, she made some pretty bad decisions. In fact, when she was found murdered, she had just been released from jail 11 days earlier. She had been held on felony theft and fraud by check charges after writing bad checks to pay for food and beer for herself and her boyfriend. Teree had a penchant for Schlitz beer and Colt malt liquor, according to reports by people who knew her around this time. But she was also trying to get her life on track and was committed to her boyfriend. Right now is as good a time as any to tell you that Teree's boyfriend was named Teree. Yes, you heard me right. Teree and Teree were a couple and clearly set out to make my podcasting life more difficult. I'm going to call boyfriend Teree, Teree D, to distinguish him going forward. Just to state up front here, Teree, our victim, was struggling with her financial situation. She had no money and no real way to make money. According to people who knew her, she always borrowed money and never paid anyone back. She owed her friends Chris P. and David W. sums that she'd borrowed over the previous months. And then she resorted to check fraud, and then she and Teree D. decided to steal a van. These 2 bad decisions led to Teree's arrest. Here is some of Teree's timeline to help us understand the case. In July of 1975, Teree and Teree were hitchhiking in Limon, Colorado, heading to Denver. A guy named Nestor T. picked them up in his van, and when he found out they had nowhere to stay, he said they could crash at his place, just until they got jobs and got on their feet. That lasted about a week and a half. Nestor felt that the Terees were outstaying their welcome, and also, Teree had gotten a job at Reese's Coffee House, so she now had an income, however meager. Nestor asked them to push on. After Nestor kicked them out, Teree and Teree moved into a Coal Creek Canyon property owned by their friend Chris P.'s grandparents. Chris lived in a cabin on the property, and for a couple of months, Teree and Teree lived in a trailer on the property. Chris and Teree D. would drive Teree the 45 minutes to work at the coffee shop every day, and then the 2 men would party at their buddy David Williams' house while Teree was at work until her shift was over. The whole thing wasn't really a sustainable lifestyle. Terry and Teree were crashing in a borrowed trailer, and they were taking advantage of their friend Chris's hospitality. They needed a plan. Terry and Teree had spoken between themselves about the idea of stealing Nestor's van. They weren't making enough to live on and didn't really have anywhere to live, and they felt that if they got the van, they could head back to Casper and start anew. So in early October 1975, they went to Nestor's house and stole his van, went to the trailer in Coal Creek and got their clothes, and set off for Casper. They stopped in North Glen for gas and proceeded north on I-25 with $1.75 in their pockets. Terry and Teree arrived at Terry's parents' house in Casper. They weren't home, but Terry's sister Nina gave them a few dollars. Terry admitted the van they were driving was stolen. Then the two left. Nina never saw her sister again. Nestor called the police about his stolen van, and Terry and Teree were arrested on October 10th and thrown in the Adams County Jail. Teree was released on November 26th after being sentenced to probation on the felony theft count. She paid a $250 personal recognizance bond on the check charge. She filled out the release paperwork and then used the probation office phone to call for a ride. On the night she was released, she and her friend Rydeen T., whom she'd met in jail, arrived at a party at the home of a Lyle R. The two women stayed at Lyle's home in the mountains from Wednesday until Sunday afternoon, and then they returned to Denver. They crashed at an apartment on Elian Circle owned by a girl named Carol. Around December 1st, Lyle gave Teree a ride to the Gart Brothers sporting goods store managed by Becker family friend Sam W. Sam gave Teree $40 for a deposit on a shared apartment in Denver and a warm-down winter coat and gloves. Sam offered Teree a work shift at his store on that coming Saturday, and Teree gratefully accepted. You see, Terry D. was still in the Adams County Jail with his trial scheduled for March 1976, as he was unable to make bond. Teree was determined to pay her boyfriend's bond so he could get out. She was making an attempt to straighten out her life, going in on an apartment in Denver to secure a home base and then find a job. She moved into the Denver apartment with Rydeen and another young woman and a young man. On December 4th, Teree set out to hitchhike to Brighton to check in with her probation officer as required and visit her boyfriend Terry D. She visited Terry D at 2:35 p.m. When their time was up, she left. No one knows for sure where she went. And then someone killed her. Okay, let's go back to the crime scene. Detective Lewark, observing the scene in the roughly mown field, concluded that the young woman, whom we now know was Teree, had likely been killed elsewhere and brought to the field and posed. Several items lay scattered within 2 feet of the body. A black comb was on the ground right above Terry's head. A pair of Levi's was above her left arm, and a pair of women's blue underwear lay next to them. Near a set of parallel tire tracks 9 feet to the left of the body were 2 blue socks, and a blue sweater lay 5 feet from the body in the same area. Yellow bikini bottoms were on the ground 8 feet and 9 inches from the body. A check written by a Teree Becker to Mini Mart lay 9 feet and 8 inches from the body right on the edge of the access road, and a Coors can lay to the east of the body, 7 feet from a plowed field that abutted the weedy one in which Teree lay. Farther away from the body was a pair of brown hiking boots. They lay 38 feet and 45 feet from the woman's remains, respectively. There were no helpful footprints in the area. The only visible print was a knee print near the victim's right leg. The tire tracks cut across the field and led east. It was unknown whether they were related to the crime, but the socks, sweater, bikini bottoms, and boots lay very near the tire tracks, so it seemed unlikely that they were not. I was kind of surprised to learn that nothing was done by the original investigators to identify the type of vehicle that made these tire tracks. They don't appear to have measured them or made notes about them or taken photos of tire treads. The scene was photographed and documented in a sketch by Officer Burke. Detectives measured the scene, documenting that the body lay 131 feet east of the Lowell Boulevard fence line. The officers at the scene searched the area and collected all the physical evidence they could find. In a sign of the Times, Detective Lewark's notes say, quote, "At the scene, responding officer attempted to collect all the evidence in sight," end quote. Besides all the items near the body, they collected soil samples and 2 weed stalks 18 inches from the body that had drops of blood on them. And Adams County Sheriff's Office lab technician Ken Van Cleve took plaster casts of the knee print found near the body. The evidence was sent to the CBI for analysis. Tests determined that the blood on the sweater was Terry's own, type AB negative. There was no semen on the clothing or boots. Police learned from Terry's friends that she rarely wore a bra, so the fact that no bra was found meant nothing. No prints were found on the empty Coors can. A week or so into the investigation, Detectives Keller and Lewark consulted a Dr. John Mirich at Metropolitan State College. He reviewed the crime scene photos and drew the following conclusions. Terry was placed in the location and position in which she was found. He did not think the location was necessarily one known to the killer or killers. It was possible someone just picked an out-of-the-way spot. He thought, based on the possibility that the autopsy had noted the chance that Terry had been raped post-mortem, that the killer was a sexual deviant or druggie. If the former, he could require violence in order to achieve orgasm. Or it was possible that he had picked Terry up hitchhiking, and she'd rebuffed his advances and he became enraged. The bruises on Terry's body may have resulted from a struggle inside a vehicle, such as the bruises on her legs, the inside of her arms, and her throat. Dr. Mirich advised that the man who raped Terry and left her in a field had a strong hatred of women. He had likely done something like this before. Detectives quickly learned that Terry had a boyfriend, this Teree D, and it was not hard at all for them to track him down. That was because he was sitting in the Adams County Jail, where he'd been since October. Since he was incarcerated when Terry was killed, he had the perfect alibi. Detective Lewark released Teree D on furlough to go with him to the Rice Funeral Chapel, where he identified the body of the woman found on December 6th as his girlfriend Terry. Despite being in the clink, Teree D had some important information for the detective. He said his girlfriend Terry had visited him during visiting hours on December 4th, a Thursday, around 2 p.m. She told him that she had hitchhiked to Brighton from Denver and had only 14 cents on her. She told him she had moved to an apartment in Denver using money that she had borrowed. The detective asked Teree D whether Terry had been wearing her glasses when she visited him on the 4th. The answer was yes. Teree D was sure because he remembered her chewing on the earpiece. Was she carrying a purse? Terry was less sure about this, but thought his girlfriend might have been carrying a navy handbag. Detective Lewark knew that Terry wore glasses because she had worn a pretty big, stylish pair in her mugshot after her arrest in October. Neither the purse nor the glasses were found at the scene. Teree D did recall that Terry was wearing jeans and a jean jacket she'd found in the ladies' room at the bus station in Denver when she visited him. She was also wearing a ring on her right hand that bore the initial T, and a silver ring on her left hand with a heart on it. It's worth noting that only one ring was found on Terry's body, the heart ring on her left hand. The T ring was missing. That sounds like a trophy to me. Needless to say, Detective Lewark was curious to learn more about Terry, on the assumption that someone she knew might have killed her. He asked her boyfriend about whether she had any problems that he knew of. Teree D said no, not really. Like most young people, Terry liked to party with her friends and smoke pot and drink beer. She didn't have any enemies. Detective Lewark went to Terry's apartment. 3 dogs were inside, no one home. As he spoke to the neighbors who had no information, Terry's roommates Debbie and Rydeen arrived home. They told him they last saw Terry on the 4th at 10 o'clock in the morning. Terry was leaving the apartment, and she said she was hitchhiking to Brighton to check in with her PO and also to see her boyfriend, Teree D. When Terry didn't return home for 2 days after visiting Teree D in the county jail, they weren't concerned. Terry was a wanderer, someone who went wherever the winds took her. And the roommates had only known Terry for a few weeks and only lived with her for a few days, so they didn't have much other helpful information to share. A search of Terry's room at the apartment turned up nothing of interest. Detectives spoke with Audrey Kay, Terry's former cellmate at the Adams County Jail. They had hung out in the few days between Terry's release and when she was found slain. Audrey reported that she had seen Terry hanging out at a bar called the White Spot with a white guy named Sam. Sam was maybe 5'7", 160 pounds, with brown hair and a mustache. The two had no car and had gotten there on foot. Terry borrowed $10 from Audrey. This guy Sam turned out to be Sam R., who was also living in the apartment Terry had shared with Rydeen and Debbie. Sam confirmed that it was he who was with Terry on Tuesday at the White Spot Bar. They had just moved into the new apartment, and they got themselves a 6-pack of beer to celebrate. A quote from the police report. All 3 parties stated that on December 4th at approximately 10 a.m., they saw Terry leave the apartment, headed to an unknown destination. This was the last time the 3 stated they had seen Terry alive, end quote. So detectives suspected, based on what Teree D had told them, that Terry had set out from Denver on the 4th, hitchhiking toward Brighton to meet with her probation officer and visit Teree D in an unknown order. Detective Lewick checked with the Adams County Welfare Department in Westminster to see if Terry had been there on December 4th. Mrs. Norton in the probation department told the detective on December 7th that she did recall a woman, approximately 20 years old, who came into the office around 5 p.m. on Thursday, December 4th, asking to see probation officer Debbie Fry. Miss Fry was out sick, and the young woman mentioned something about needing a ride. This sounded like it was very likely Terry. So let's review what we know about the timeline for when Terry went missing. On December 4th, she visited Teree D at 2:35. After visiting hours, she left. She turned up at the probation office around 5, although this sighting is far from certain. No dice there, so she left. She turned up dead in the field on the 6th. Where was she for those intervening hours? No one knew. The pathologist did not believe that Terry had been dead that entire time. Remember, he estimated roughly 6 hours. And she certainly had not been lying in the field that whole time. It was out in the open. Someone would have seen her. Where had she gone? Once police issued a request for information about the murder of the young woman found in the field and stated that Teree Becker might have been hitchhiking, between 20 and 30 witnesses called in tips. It does seem that some of them might have seen Terry hitchhiking on the 4th, but no one was certain what time of day it was, what vehicle she'd gotten into, or if it was even her they saw. One very promising lead turned up when Detective Lewick learned from an Officer McLaughlin at the Westminster Police Department that on December 5th, around 6:15, he had seen a truck parked in the area of the 100th and Lowell spot right where Terry's body was found. Officer McLaughlin had made contact with the party driving and advised him that he should get out of the field. The driver was a male, and Officer McLaughlin also noticed a white female in the truck who was approximately 21 to 22 years old. Based on the officer's report, the police were able to track down this truck and its driver, Alfred D. Alfred told the detectives a very strange story that he was in the truck with his adult adopted daughter, Catherine, and he'd parked to try to find a wounded pheasant he'd seen while driving. This story was odd enough that the police insisted on also speaking to the daughter, who said the pheasant story was a lie, and that Alfred had actually parked there so he could vent to her about his marital problems. But the daughter said in no way was Alfred involved in dumping a body in the field, and police believed her and abandoned this lead. Another witness had seen some people walking near 96th Avenue, right near where Terry's body was found. A Mrs. Boyer had called in a tip that around 9 or 9:30 p.m. on the 6th of December, she saw 2 people from her window that were walking west in the direction of Federal and 96th Avenue. One was a man approximately 6 to 6'1", 180 pounds, in his late 20s, Caucasian or light Spanish American, with black collar-length hair with broad shoulders. He was wearing a 3/4-length brown or tan jacket with dark pants and was clean-shaven. The girl was 5'5" to 5'6", 120 pounds, with dark hair. Ms. Boyer noted it was unusual for someone to walk down 96th Avenue from the dirt road at that time of night because there was nothing down there. That's why she called the police. Another woman named Janice R. reported that on the 6th of December she saw a gold van out of her window, racing up the hill and thinking he was going way too fast. She turned away, and when she looked out the window again, she saw that he had pulled up off the side of the dirt road and stopped, and then he sped away. It occurred to her that he had stopped for a few minutes. This was interesting, of course, but there was no way for police to find the van Janice had seen. And nothing in the files I have indicates that any consideration was made to whether the tire tracks found near Terry's body could have been made by a van. Detective Lewick spoke with Terry's Aunt Becker, who lived in Denver. She said she hadn't seen Terry for quite some time and had no new information. But Sam W. called Detective Lewick and identified himself as a close family friend of the Beckers. He had spoken with Terry's father, Bill Becker, who had asked him to find out any information he could about what happened to his daughter. Sam told the detective he had known Terry since she was born. She'd called him often from jail, and when she got out, he agreed to loan her $40 for a deposit on the Denver apartment. On December 1st, she came into the Gart Brothers store he managed, and he gave her $40 in cash, a blue down coat, and some down gloves. Now, this is important because Sam had seen Terry on the day she vanished. he reported that Teree came back into the store on December 4th at 12:30 p.m. and told Sam she was going to hitchhike to Brighton to visit her boyfriend. Sam said, "No, don't hitchhike," and gave her a $1 bill plus a little less than $1 in change that he had in his pocket. Sam knew how hard up Teree was for money, and this was when he told her she could work at his store on Saturday, the 6th, from 12 to 6, if she wore nice clothing and didn't bring her friends. Teree said she was desperate for money and she would come in on Saturday the 6th. That was the last time Sam heard from her. Instead of showing up for work, she was found dead in a field in Westminster. Police interviewed every man they could find who knew Teree. Her friend Sam R., the guy who allowed Teree and Teree to stay with him, Chris P. They also interviewed a supposed drug dealer friend of Teree's, a David Williams, a.k.a. Lumpy. No one seemed to know anything about what had happened to Teree. One man whom detectives looked at very hard for Teree's murder was someone whom they believed had a motive. This was Nestor T., the man who had hosted the Terees in his home and whose van they'd subsequently stolen. Police wondered whether Nestor had wanted to get even with Teree, especially after they spoke with her former cellmate at the Adams County Jail, someone named Lita. Lita told them that the only person she ever heard Teree talk about coming on to her in an undesired way was Nestor. She said that he hit on her over and over again, and every time she rejected him, and he would get very angry. To make a long story short, Nestor lived in Denver, but he worked as a carpet installer for a company in Shawnee, Kansas. Detectives brought him in and read him his rights. They, of course, asked Nestor if he had anything going on with Teree while she was staying with him. He said no and claimed he didn't find her attractive. He said his girlfriend, Candy, had insisted that he ask Teree and Teree to leave, so he did. Then they stole his van, and he had to go all the way to Wyoming to retrieve it after police arrested the Terees. Asked about his alibi, Nestor said he'd been on carpet install jobs in Kansas on December 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. He remembered all the addresses and even the number of yards of carpet installed at each. Detective Lewerk contacted Sergeant Myers of the Kansas City PD to verify Nestor's alibi. He called back and reported he had spoken to Nestor's employer, and he had indeed done carpet installations on those dates in Shawnee, Kansas. Nonetheless, Detective Lewerk went to each and every one of the Shawnee businesses and showed Nestor's photo to the customers. They all verified his presence on those days. And Nestor's neighbors were interviewed at length to see if he had possibly turned up in Denver on the dates in question, December 4th through 6th. They could not place him there. No blood or any other evidence of a crime was found in his van either. Detective Lewerk's notes say, quote, "There were no noticeable stains or any other physical evidence that could be attributed to the homicide." Nestor agreed to take a polygraph to assess his knowledge of the murder. He did so, sitting for a 2-hour exam, and the results were deemed inconclusive. Nestor agreed to take another test, but I don't know whether he did. I think it's safe to say the detectives really suspected Nestor, but there was absolutely nothing tying him to the crime. And soon, they got an even better lead. On December 12th, the Westminster PD investigators contacted witness Patty Dean, age 16. She said that she and her brother Ronald were at the Adams County Jail on December 4th, around 3:15 p.m., visiting their foster brother Keith. She identified a picture of Teree Becker as being there at the same time. This was when Teree had visited Terry D. Patty said when she arrived at the sheriff's office, there was a tannish white Volkswagen parked to the side of the front door, with a black fender on the right front and no back bumper. Inside the car was a black male and a white male. Both parties came into the sheriff's office, went back out to the car, and then the white man came back into the sheriff's office and talked to the woman identified as Teree Becker. Patty said the conversation went as follows. The man asked, "Are you waiting for somebody?" Teree replied, "No." The man replied, "Do you need a ride?" Teree replied, "Well, I live in West Denver." The man replied, "That's okay." They then went out to the Volkswagen where the white male opened the car door and Teree got into the rear seat of the Volkswagen. Patty described the black male as late 20s to early 30s, with hair 1 inch long, really dark skin, no glasses, 5'6" to 5'7", 145 pounds, wearing blue jeans and a short-sleeved waffle weave long underwear style shirt. The white male was early 20s, with collar-length blonde hair which covered up half his ears parted on the right. He was wearing wire-rimmed glasses and had a blonde mustache. He was 5'7", 145 pounds, and was wearing yellow, white, and orange checkered pants, a button-down short-sleeved shirt, a watch on the left hand with a flexible band, brown boots, and a beige or tan belt. Patty also said that Teree was carrying a shoulder purse described as a blue jean type material. Patty's brother Ronald was with her that day, and he also observed the two men get into the car with the woman in the photo police showed him, believed to be Teree Becker. Ronald said the white guy rode shotgun and Teree got in the back. They headed westbound on Bridge Street. This was the information police had been waiting for. It's hard to overstate how crucial police found this lead to be. They finally had some suspects in the Teree Becker murder, a white guy and a black guy driving a VW Super Beetle. Patty and Ronald worked with police sketch artists to come up with composite drawings of the two men they'd seen. A Be on the Lookout teletype containing the composites was sent statewide, requesting any information regarding the two men in the Volkswagen. Scores of men started to be called in. The most promising were two men arrested by Rangeley PD officer Bill Murray at a Western Union in his town. They were arrested on a drunken disorderly charge. The one black man and one white man fit the description provided by Patty. The black man was identified as Grant S. With him was Clifton H. Clifton was wearing wire-rimmed glasses just as described by Patty. They were driving a black 1957 Dodge pickup that had a stolen permit belonging to a white Chevrolet. They were also wanted on a burglary charge out of rifle. Their photos were sent to the Westminster police to be shown to the witnesses. Detective J.A. Keller spoke with an officer Jeff Smith at Commerce City PD, who reported he had stopped a David W. in reference to the teletype. He was driving a Camaro with a white top and a black right front fender, just like the coloring of the Volkswagen described by Patty. David was a Caucasian male, 5'8", 140 pounds with blonde hair and blue eyes, and wore glasses. His best friend was known to be a black man named D. Alexander, who had some drug arrests. Their photos were also sent to the Westminster PD. Photos of all these dudes were shown to the eyewitness Patty, who did not identify any of them as the guys in the VW with Teree. Police looked into the possibility that the VW being driven by the suspects was stolen. They uncovered information that 2 yellow Beetles had recently been stolen in the area. One had been recovered and was deemed not to be the car they were looking for. The other was still MIA. All agencies were altered to be on the lookout for all light tan or beige or pale yellow Volkswagens. Detective Lewerk obtained a list of 200 Beetles matching this description in the Denver area and started tracking them down. On the 16th, Detective Keller located a witness who had actually talked with Teree on the day in question, December 4th. Pamela J. had been visiting her brother Vincent in the Adams County Jail around 3:00 p.m. that day. Keller showed Pamela a picture of Teree, and Pamela recognized her with no hesitation. Teree had been sitting next to her while they each visited their loved ones in the visiting room. Pamela said Teree was wearing a jean jacket, jeans, a light-colored blouse, glasses, and possibly some necklaces. Pamela said when she came into the prison visiting area to talk to her brother, Teree was already there talking to a white male inmate we know to be Teree D. She could hear part of their conversation and statements by Teree that she loved him very much and couldn't wait till he got out. She even heard a male jailer call to Teree and say, "Teree, you gotta leave now." And she said, "Yeah, I know." And he also said, "Teree, you have to put out your cigarette. You're not allowed to smoke in here." At this point, Teree broke off the conversation with the inmate and left through the big glass doors. Pamela's sister Tina was at the jail that day too, visiting her brother along with her sister. She too noted Teree. She identified her from photos and recalled very clearly that Teree had spoken with several people at the front desk of the jail. And she saw Teree leave with a white male in his late 20s with shaggy blonde hair and a mustache. He was approximately 5'7", 130 pounds, with a pock-marked face. He wore his hair parted in the middle. His clothing was a red and white checkered shirt, blue jeans, and dark brown square-toed boots. Teree and this man left the jail together, and the man pointed towards Brighton, and both of them walked to a yellow Volkswagen Super Beetle that was probably a 1972 model with a black or dark blue interior. Tina didn't notice anything unusual about the vehicle, but sitting in the car was a black male described as having very dark skin, in his mid-20s with hair about 1 inch long. The white guy opened the passenger door for Teree and she got in. The white guy got in the front seat and the vehicle left westbound on Bridge Street towards Brighton. The detectives had Tina look at the composite drawing made by Patty. She verified that the black man looked the same, but she wasn't as sure about the white guy. The detectives showed her photos of all the men they had gathered as possible suspects so far, but she didn't recognize any of them. Tina agreed to come in and meet with Paul, a technician at the Denver PD, to do a composite drawing of the white man Teree left with. She met with him for about an hour and a half, and a composite drawing was made, copied, and circulated. I don't have copies of the composites in this case, but it's safe to say the VW was considered almost certainly to be the vehicle that drove Teree away from the jail. Detective Keller returned to the jail to speak with Teree D. again and showed him all the composites of men Teree possibly drove away from the jail with. Teree D. didn't recognize any of them, but said Teree would absolutely accept a ride from anyone. She didn't care about race or anything like that. She was a people person and a devoted hitchhiker. On December 19th, Detectives Keller and Lewark were alerted to a promising suspect. Arvada PD had pulled over a yellow VW with a black male driving and arrested him for marijuana possession, and then charged him with possession of an illegal weapon when a switchblade was found in the car. He was Harvey Ray W. He fit the description of the black VW driver described by Patty and Tina to a T. The Westminster detectives came to Arvada to interview Harvey. He agreed to speak with them, saying he had nothing to hide. He'd never been to Brighton. He'd never heard of Teree Becker. He absolutely denied killing her. He agreed to take a polygraph, and technician Ken Van Cleve was called in to give the exam. The questions were along the lines of, did you kill Teree? Did you take any part in her murder? Did you see Teree die? Are you the person who picked her up from the jail? And so on. Harvey's results were inconclusive. In a follow-up interview, he was very inconsistent with his story about what he was doing on December 4th. He couldn't commit to one story. He was either home watching TV or out drinking. But he had no criminal record, and they had to let him go. Detective Keller's notes state that his opinion is that Harvey had loaned his vehicle to someone and was possibly covering up for that person. On December 30th, detectives were getting desperate to find the guys in the Volkswagen. They contacted several newspapers and TV stations in the area and asked them to broadcast Teree's picture in an attempt to gain information about the men who had picked her up at the Adams County Jail. By March, Detective Keller was off the case and Detective Moriarty stepped in. He and Detective Lewark continued to look into a lot of men in the area who were mentioned as resembling the composites. The investigation petered out at the end of March 1976. In January 1977, there was a brief resurgence of work in this case with a jail deputy at the Denver Sheriff's Office named Kenneth Jenkins, calling in a tip that his stepson and his son's friend could be the men in the yellow VW Super Beetle the police were looking for. Detectives Moriarty and Lewark looked into Thomas Newell and his buddy Kevin G. and showed their photos to Patty and Ronald Dean, who failed to identify them as the men at the Adams County Jail on December 4th, 1975. Both Thomas and Kevin took polygraphs on January 12th, 1977. I don't know if they passed, but I do know that this was the end of the leads on men in the Volkswagen Beetle. And I'd like to point out that although police did a ton of work on this angle, it is entirely possible, and I think likely, that Teree had gotten dropped off by the guys in the Beetle at her probation officer's office, where a woman meeting her description showed up around 5 p.m. asking for her PO. If that's the case, the men in the Volkswagen had nothing to do with her murder, and this was all a giant red herring. Teree's case stalled after the initial investigative flurry. By 1981, Detective Lewark was the only investigator remaining on the case, and he admitted to the Westminster Sentinel that the case was very cold, and that the only time he picked it back up was when a report came over the teletype of a similar murder somewhere in another jurisdiction. Westminster itself had only 1 or 2 murders a year. But it doesn't seem the case had stalled due to investigative inexperience. Rather, the murder seemed to be random, and as we know, those are the hardest kind to solve absent DNA or other forensic evidence. The next time the investigation picked up, it was November 1983. Longtime listeners might already know where I'm going with this based on that date alone. Yes, much investigative time and attention was devoted to Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole. 4 investigators from Colorado law enforcement agencies, Detective Frank Lewark from Westminster, Detective James McCord from the Arapahoe County Sheriff's Department, and Carl Whiteside and Mick Gillespie of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation all traveled to Florida to interview Otis Toole about murders in the Centennial State. This was considered a worthwhile endeavor because Toole and Lucas had air quote confessed to murders in Colorado, including that of Sylvia Quayle, which I covered in a previous episode. The 4 investigators sat down with Otis Toole, and he told them he had murdered between 400 and 500 people. Then the investigators reeled off the names of the unsolved Colorado murder victims and showed him crime scene photos. Of course, this is almost guaranteed to generate a so-called confession, since the investigators were giving away so much info about the crimes. Toole looked at Terry's crime scene photos and said, "It looked like something Henry Lee Lucas would do." The next day, they showed him the photos again and asked him if he had a hand in Terry's murder. All he would say was, "I can't really be sure," although at one point he said, "She does look like one." To his credit, Detective Lewick wasn't persuaded. His report says, quote, "Due to the information received from Otis Toole during the 2 days this officer interviewed him, it is this officer's opinion that there is a 99% chance that Otis Toole did not, in fact, kill Teree Becker." End quote. On December 2nd, 1983, Detective Lewick sent a letter to the sheriff's office in Georgetown, Texas, asking them to talk to Henry Lee Lucas about the Teree Becker homicide. He sent some pictures of the crime scene and said that Otis Toole had stated it looked like Henry's work. I don't know what happened with this, but I do know that Henry Lee Lucas did not kill Teree, and the investigators finally figured out that he was a big fat liar who relished the attention lavished on him by lawmen desperate to clear their books of unsolved murders. This is the end of Part 1 of the Teree Becker and Cherrie Bridgewater case. Part 2 is available right now.